And we're rolling. Welcome everybody. This is SIG VMware meeting, the bi-weekly meeting that happens every other Thursday. Today is July the 19th, July 19th, 2018. And we anticipate a short meeting. We have a slightly smaller agenda than last time. Unfortunately, we had a demo that we had to cancel at the last minute. It's going to be rescheduled for the next meeting. And with that said, I think you can take it off, Steve.
Okay, I posted a link to the notes. By the way, as Fabio said, this is recorded and the recordings are posted to YouTube. So if you don't like that, get off now. The meeting notes and agenda are posted in the chat. Like all Kubernetes SIGs, the two chairs are supposed to ask for a volunteer to do note-taking. Is there anybody here who can open that agenda notes doc and wants to take notes if needed?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We'll move on to the agenda then. We've got all SIGs were instructed to compose a charter. We've had one pending. We put one together, and I think at a prior meeting, I posted a link, but the steering committee wanted explicit coverage in our charter as to why we couldn't exist as a working group underneath the cloud provider SIG. So that charter draft was amended recently, and it's back for review by the steering committee. The link is in the agenda notes if somebody wants to see further details. Moving on, I should have put this last, but there is the spreadsheet to track items, and those items are things that Fabio is going to cover in a moment. But if anybody wants to update status on those or add new things that this group should track, please follow that link, and it's editable. It is not centrally administered, so you're free to add new items or update status on the existing ones there. Please do that, because we'd like to as we undertake new missions, and some of the missions we've got, like the cloud provider, are big enough that there are many people working on it, and we want to track it on a fine-grained level. And that spreadsheet is the central go-to place to do that. So I'd invite anybody involved on existing items to go there and update status or look at it. And anybody who wants to suggest new things that you'd expect to get done in the next quarter, please make an entry there and we can discuss it. Finally, there were some shiftings of SIG times. Kubernetes continues to add more and more SIGs. It seems like occasionally some are eliminated, but more have been created than eliminated, and this results in the meeting times being shuffled. I know that SIG architecture is a popular destination for many people in this group, and we're now in conflict with the SIG architecture meeting. So I'll open it up for discussion as to whether anybody feels that we should consider shifting our time. I think if there's more than a tiny minority of people who think we should consider this, what we'll do is move on to some kind of a online vote. So anyone out there have any thoughts on whether we ought to shift the time of this meeting?
For me personally, I was attending SIG architecture meetings before. Given that we're conflicting now, I will gladly move this to a different time slot. But I also understand that this is a very a decent time slot because it's right before lunch for people in the Pacific time zone, and it's in the afternoon, and it's not too late for people in Europe. So it's I understand it's a very good spot right now, but again.
Yeah, I also was attending it, and I think that people who are likely to have conflicts are anybody working on virtual kubelet and things that would map vSphere resource management and DRSHA onto Kubernetes. That SIG architecture might be something they'd want to monitor and perhaps in the future even submit discussion items to. However, that said, there are so many SIGs now that pretty much anywhere you move it to is going to have a conflict with anybody.
I will say that.
Fabio, do you want to just put a poll out with a couple of alternates and we'll just see what happens, and make one of the choices no move at all, and we'll just see what happens?
Yeah, there is a poll out there for the other cloud provider vSphere, given that we have another meeting, which is cloud provider vSphere, which is another biweekly meeting, half an hour, that was scheduled to be right after SIG cloud provider meeting. It was a shift due to 4th of July. They pushed back entire week, so we're now offsetted by a week. So in the meeting we had yesterday, we decided to potentially reschedule that to a more efficient time for everybody. The poll is out now, so we'll wait. The poll will be open for 48 hours. After that is done, just not to create confusion, I will open up a poll for potentially changing a meeting time for SIG VMware as well. And I will also add an option for keeping the same time as it is today.
Yeah, how about options for keeping the exact same time and week of month sync we have now, and another one for shifting it by a week but keeping the time?
Yeah.
And maybe, as this gets complex, I could see a scenario where maybe you want people to allow votes for multiple choices. It could be that we'll throw 4 of them out there and people would like two of the 4 rather than voting for just a singleton.
Yeah, it's a very raw form of polling, but it works. People can vote for multiple options, so it's fine.
Okay, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the chair over to you, Fabio. And
yeah, so the first thing I want to give as an updates on the active projects we have. I talked about the cloud provider vSphere a little bit, so just to expand on what happened. First of all, let's quickly talk about the meeting time. So we have this biweekly meeting. Currently, it's on Wednesday, and it's at is it 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Pacific? It's 2 p.m. Pacific. This was scheduled to be right after SIG Cloud Provider, which is another bi-weekly meeting. They pushed back a week, so now we're offsetted. So they didn't have a meeting yesterday. They had a meeting last week. We had a meeting this week, yesterday, and we will not have a meeting next week. So given that it's pretty late in the evening for Europe, it's actually 11 p.m. for Europe. We were thinking about changing the time. And if you look at the agenda, there's a link for a message on Slack with a poll. You can vote for a new time slot. I try to pick time slots that work for everybody, including people on the Pacific time zone. Obviously, it would be, maybe not that early for people on the West Coast, but easy enough for people in the East Coast and easy enough for people in Europe as well. And that was it for the update on the meeting time. But there's also a lot of changes happening in the cloud provider vSphere. Namely, we do have a PR open for a working prototype of the new CCM, so the Auto Tree cloud provider. So I encourage everybody, if you have a vSphere environment available that you can run tests on, to try out. It's a PR, so it's not merged yet. It is still under review, but the code that is there is in working condition, so you can actually build it. We're actually looking for volunteers to write documentation for it. I'm not gonna delve on all the issues that we have open, but if you head over to github.com/Kubernetes/cloud provider vSphere, there's a bunch of issues on documentation, And there's also obviously this PR open with the code that you can try out on your machine. There's a makefile. If you run makefile images, it will create Docker images that you can use to deploy this new CCM on your vSphere cluster. And yeah, if you're interested in actually working on the cloud provider vSphere, which is also being let's say managed under the SIG cloud provider now, please feel free to join the calls and feel free to sign up for some work or reach out to me in Slack if you're not sure how to go from there. Next up, Cluster API. This is another interesting one. Cluster API is a project that is being, I'm not sure what's the current status right now, but it's being incubated. It's been fostered under SIG cluster lifecycle. And Cluster API has some overlap with cloud provider, but not necessarily it's not necessarily the same thing. So Cluster API, the aim of Cluster API is to provide lifecycle management for Kubernetes nodes, which means that Cluster API will be able to provision new nodes, new Kubernetes nodes on a cloud platform. So for example, if we take vSphere as an example, Cluster API with a vSphere provider will be able to provision new VMs with Kubernetes on it, destroy those VMs, report back information, report back metrics, and so on and so forth. So right now, Cluster API, if we want to have support for VMware platforms, we will have to start working on it. So right now, there is no umbrella SIG, just like there is SIG Cloud Provider for Cluster API. So right now, we will have to have a sub-project sponsored under SIG VMware if we want to sponsor some work on VMware platforms. So I'm actually thinking about sponsoring a new sub-project under SIG VMware for Cluster API. I'm going to send out an email on the mailing list on the Google Groups. So if you're not signed up on the Google Groups, please use the link that is in the meeting notes to join. So you will start receiving emails from the mailing list. There's very little traffic, so don't worry about receiving tons of emails from there. I will send out an email and ask for lazy consensus on this. I expect to get the ball rolling, by the next meeting. And last but not least, we have an update on the zones implementation, and I think we have Michael or Jaitong that want to talk about this.
Hey, yeah, this is Michael. I just took some notes, Fabio. Just please have a look at whether I took them right. So on the VCP zones issue, just for the folks on the phone who are new to this call or have missed the prior calls on VCP zones. So the current VMware vSphere Cloud Provider for Kubernetes does not support the concept of failure domains or availability zones that is part of the Cloud Provider interface. And so we picked up the work from Anthony. And so I was working with Jaitong lately on the finding consensus on the design proposal that we put in the issue and having a specific implementation. And so Jaitong shared, gave an update to me this week. He's also on the call, I think. Yes, he is. So I'll leave it up to him. Just briefly, the updates from recently around the zones implementation. So we found some consensus in how we map the construct of a zone, which typically in the cloud maps to like a data center in AWS, for example, and AZ. But on vSphere, a zone could be arbitrary. It could be a host. It could be a rack. It could be a site. So we discussed some implementations, how we allow those arbitrary topologies for our customers. And then we split up the implementation into two phases. Phase one being the actual implementation of the zones interface in the cloud provider, and phase two, a little bit more forward-looking into how we combine the implementation with some of the vSphere advanced features around DRS and vMotion, which could potentially lead to drift and some kind of inconsistencies of how Kubernetes perceives a zone and the implementation versus what vSphere can do under the covers in terms of maintenance, for example, or HA. So I'll pass it to Jitong if you not sure if you want to share something or you want to give more details around it.
Jaitan, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. So currently, VM is a node, and we run kubelets on a VM. So as Michael and I discussed this Monday, so we decided to apply it on a VM level, like the tag will need to tag on the VM. So for example, we have hosts and the VM runs under the hosts, right? So if we want to use the zones in zones feature, we need to like tag the associated the tag into the VM. And we also need to have a category, two categories, because in the failure domain we have zones and regions. So in the vSphere, we also need to have two categories that respond to the two failure domains. So there has a question now. So how to name them? So our customers maybe have the different names for that. So the discussion result of Michael and I was that we have a VCP config file. So we can let our users, our customers to configure their categories names into the VCP file, and I will read the category name from that file. So I will add some fields, new fields in the vSphere type. So inside of vSphere.go, so there is a vSphere type struct. So I will need to add some new fields in that. And okay, so there's another thing. So hi, Michael. Yeah, so there's a new feature that we need to have like VMware host failure domain. So can you describe some details on that?
Yes, sure. So as Jitong said, so for the phase 1 implementation, we'll use categories, vSphere categories by an administrator to map a region and availability zone to the well-known labels the kubelet uses for when it registers to the API server. But then we had the discussion around, since vSphere as a hypervisor allows to run multiple, potentially multiple kubelets on the same host, the vSphere hypervisor itself would be another level of failure domain. And Anthony, in his vSphere scheduling plugin, used the vSphere hypervisor as another layer of failure domain and informed the Kubernetes scheduler to, for example, honor anti-affinity between two pods and not put two pods on two VMs, which would happen potentially to run on the same ASIC hypervisor, because that defeats the sense of anti-affinity usually. So we are thinking about having kind of, besides the region and zone well-known labels, adding another topology key, which is the hypervisor itself, as another option to populate the kubelet with, so the scheduler will be able to decide whether to put two pods on two kubelets on the same ASIC hypervisor or on different hypervisor based on affinity or anti-affinity. Is that what you mean, Jitong?
Yeah. Okay. So this is phase 1, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is phase 1. Yeah.
That's phase 1. Are you finished with phase 1? Shall we just quickly describe phase 2?
Yeah. I'm finished with phase 1. Yeah.
Okay. So there's like Jitong, he showed me some implementation for phase 1. There's still some questions that need to be answered. For example, if other orchestrators or deployment mechanisms are in the game, for example, Bosch. So we are also working with some of the pivotal engineers and getting consensus around higher level deployment mechanisms in phase 1. Now phase 2 actually is something that we have to implement unless a customer completely disables DRS and HA in a vSphere cluster, which usually defeats the sense of having DRS and HA. So we expect customers to have DRS and HA enabled in a vSphere cluster, meaning that VMs could travel. They could travel on the same zone. They could travel between zones depending on HA and DRS affinity rules, being soft or hard rules. Now, in order to detect drift that might happen, for example, after vMotion in case of maintenance, or HA after unplanned downtime, we have to have a controller that, first of all, informs us about drift. For example, a VM on host 1 gets migrated onto another site, onto another AZ, but since the labels cannot be automatically or live updated, the label would just stick with the old information, but now running on another AZ, for example, which could bring confusion into the Kubernetes scheduler. So we need a way to detect that drift and allow for remediation. And there's different approaches to this. Detecting drift is not so much of an issue because we can just compare the current labels that we see versus the text and the VM where it's currently running. So detecting drift can be then implemented with a controller. Now the remediation is a little bit more tricky because it could be a disruptive remediation or a non-disruptive remediation for the workload. And so we need to figure out whether we perhaps make it configurable that if a drift is detected, we are going to reconcile, which could cause disruption, or we just make it like an alert or a monitoring event that a cluster operator could act on. So HA and DRS are some very advanced techniques in vSphere, and we usually recommend to enable them in a cluster. But we have to do some work and find consensus in how to incorporate in Kubernetes scheduling logic.
Michael,
Yes.
Have you thought about where this might best reside? It strikes me that you probably need some Kubernetes credentials to go edit labels and things, implying that it might best live in Kubernetes, but I'm wondering if it might also require configuration modifications on the vSphere side.
You're asking for phase 2 or phase 1?
Well, I guess both.
Okay,
but,
so yes.
That
okay.
might give us some ideas as to how to best implement this, as an operator, something else.
Yes, exactly.
One thing I might dismiss is doing it in Bosch just because it wouldn't work for people who aren't using Bosch.
Exactly. So what we thought about is using a Kubernetes native way. So first of all, just using Kubernetes core primitives that are in kind of every canonical Kubernetes distribution, but then also use Kubernetes primitives in order to have the labeling work in phase 1 and having the detection, drift, and remediation also in phase 2. So other people, the community, customers, whoever running Kubernetes could just deploy a pod, for example, for phase 2 for the controller, making it a Kubernetes native experience. For phase 1, the way Jitong implemented it is to make a call before the kubelet starts and registers itself to the API server. He queries the current categories and tags being associated to the respective VM. So that's happening from inside the VM, and the kubelet then will be populated with the labels. Jitong, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Make a query to the vSphere. And query the tag.
Yeah. So Steve, to your question, we try to make it as close as possible to Kubernetes core and primitives.
That's great. I was actually thinking while you were talking about the implementation zones, there's a potential twist here because we also have vSphere on AWS, so VMC, which will potentially map availability zones not only across the host that you may have in your vSphere cluster on a specific AWS data center, but also across various real AZs from AWS. Like I know that there are hosts available across multiple AZs. So people might want to have.
when you host it on AWS in multiple AWS availability zones, is that one vCenter or multiple vCenters?
I don't know the details for that, but I'm pretty sure they're different. I mean, they must be different. I'm not up to speed with the details, but I know for sure that you can have vSphere hosts on one availability zone, like they say US West 1, and you can have vSphere host on US East 1. So it will be in different data centers. It will be in different AZs.
Exactly.
From that perspective.
And that's why we want to make the tagging and mapping to zone kind of being arbitrary. So in that case, on VMC, it nicely maps to a physical data center in AZ in AWS. So a vSphere or VMC administrator would tag the A6i host in that corresponding AZ with the tag AZ1, for example. And then we would just query vCenter as we do in an on-premises environment. So I think the VMC model is the closest to the other cloud provider integrations when it comes to zone support. We just had to think about it a little bit deeper around on-premises environments where we can assume 3 zones, separate data centers, for example.
I'm going to throw this out there. We've got 16 attendees online today, according to Zoom. And I know this is heavily oriented towards engineers, but I'm wondering, are there any users out there who are interested in this functionality? And if so, I'd love to have some user voice on this to make sure we're covering the features and maybe even enlist you to review some documentation and provide some guidance on how to best make this work.
Well, I can speak up on behalf of Vic. We've had customer request this feature in Vic.
Okay.
Not with Kubernetes support, but with just container support.
And if you're watching the recording and you're not, watching this live, feel free to reach out to us on SIG VMware, the SIG VMware Slack channel on this, because this will be very helpful to better understand, as many use cases as possible for this.
Yeah, I think this is a real opportunity to do things that go beyond the scope of what Kubernetes itself can do with regard to resource management and high availability. I have to believe there are users out here who could really utilize this functionality, and there are limits to what you can accomplish today within the framework of Kubernetes, the container runtime, and the Linux OS, which is how the system by itself delivers availability and resource management today.
Good. Thanks, Michael and Jaitong.
What I can do is I could talk to Patrick and see if we can perhaps ask those customers if they would mind inputting some more information on how they would like it implemented. But I'm not sure they're using Kubernetes yet.
Yeah, it could be that this type of thing is keeping people from using it because they are stuck with legacy platforms to get what they need.
Okay, there is another thing I'm thinking about. That is, in order to query the tags and the categories from vSphere, I need to have 4 or 5 files as a package that I need to refer that files, which means that files maybe need to be need to be set entry in the Kubernetes code. But actually, I only query 3 or 4 functions, but the whole bunch of files, they have maybe 20 functions. So there are waste of many functions. So I'm thinking that where to put that code, where to put that package.
Yeah, the other issue is to query the vSphere. I assume you need credentials, and so does the storage solution, associated with Hatchway. It seems like maybe we could architect this to utilize one set of these credentials, keep them secure, rather than impose upon the user a requirement to go out there and duplicate this.
Mm. Yeah, that's what I have. Okay, sorry. And so the feature of the phase 1 will be available very soon. So after that, I want maybe users can first try that and give us some feedback.
Yeah, that sounds like a great progress you guys have done so far. Also, this, just to be clear for people that may not have, followed this development, the work that Jaitan and Michael are working on right now is part of the in-tree cloud provider. So this is still part of Kubernetes core. When this work is done, we will start working on porting the code over to the AutoTree cloud provider. And that's it for the updates on the active projects. We do have a discussion item that is bug fixes for in-tree cloud provider for, I think 1.11.1 has shipped already, so I think that the bug fixes were not actually merged into it. I don't know, Doug, are you on the call? You have a...
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you know what I know there was an outstanding issue in 1.11 that when 1.11 shipped, there was a problem with one of the UID that was basically rendering the in-tree cloud provider basically not working in some situations.
Yeah, I'll get the link and put it in the doc, but the gist was basically if the connection, because normally the connection to vCenter is persistent, if that connection gets broken, there's some logic in there to repopulate some of the fields, and basically the VM UUID was lost. So if you try to create a new volume after that happens, then you're out of luck. You'd have to restart the whole kubelet. So, and I did open a cherry pick for 1.11. Didn't make .1, but it'll be in .2. And I mean, we could also add it to 1.10 branch, but I hadn't done that yet.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the update. Also, just want to give you a shout out because Doug is the branch manager. Is that correct? Branch manager for 1.12.
For 1.12, yeah. So there's somebody else that's managing the 1.11 release branch.
So we have two people from VMware doing massive work for 1.12. We have Doug as branch manager, and we also have Tim, which is release manager for 1.12. So it's going to be a release all shepherded by VMware this time, which is a great accomplishment. Way to go, guys. And that's the end of the agenda. You guys have any questions you wanna discuss now? You wanna get on some comments or?
So Fabio, I noticed something in the Kubernetes Slack channel over the last 2 weeks, which is some users having challenges deploying the vSphere cloud provider in 1.10, 1.11, mostly due to documentation glitches, like being out of date, or for example, the vSphere UX script to deploy the VCP not being tested against 1.11. So I saw Divian in Slack channel commenting on that, and then there's an open issue on improving the documentation, where I at least tried to summarize the current state and changes. But I just didn't have time so far to improve the documentation. So whenever someone is having some time to work on the documentation, I'll put the link into the agenda, because this causes a lot of pain and frustration for users deploying VCP currently.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen that pattern happen sometimes, especially when there are releases that are not like perfectly working. Is there like a tracking issue for this in the Kubernetes repo?
Yeah, in in our fork. So I didn't create it in Kate's, but in Kate's VMware Kate's. I'll link it
Yeah.
to, yeah.
Let's this is actually a good topic for next meeting about the
Yeah, I suppose if we can put a
Kubernetes
link
fork.
to that, whether it's in the fork or not, in that spreadsheet, and then we can get a name on it.
Yeah, let's make sure that it's documented in the spreadsheet. It's documented here, and it's actually a good point. It's something that we have to take on. This VMware/Kubernetes fork that we have is something that we'd really like to go away because it's just distracting, and there's like issues, filed in way too many places. So going forward, we should dial that down and in favor of the proper places. But yeah, let's discuss that properly at the next meeting.
So
Yeah,
Fabio,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I'll put a note in the discussion then.
Thanks.
Hey Fabio, I've been looking at the cluster autoscaler and the cluster API on Clinton's suggestion. So if you want me to take point on that, I can do that.
Absolutely, I will love to. I will love to. Let's do it this way. I'll send out the email on the mailing list. I don't expect to have any pushback from the group on this. If you're willing to step up on this, I'll put down your name as a technical lead for that, and when I send the PR out to create the sub project. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, I can give you guys back 20 minutes of your life. All right. Going once. Going twice.
Lunchtime.
Right. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.